All right, so today I'm going to do something a little bit different, but this does continue with this first part of a series that I've been maintaining. Will probably develop and evolve into a lengthy series of discussions that focus on the idea of a metapoetics of paranarratology, and this series is thus, I have been referring to it as Notes Towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, and the first installment of that series is a 17-part reading, elaboration, and/or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. And this will be part 10, the grand piano as street taco, and the coincidence of the fact that this is part 10, and there were, or supposedly, if we imagine that this project, the grand piano, actually occurred and isn't a fictive construction, right? That in fact, perhaps none of these readings or events ever took place, and that's a possibility. That's right. It's possible that if we weren't there, right, that the evidence that we have in front of our eyes is the collective memory of these 10 poets, or the collective deception perhaps of these 10 poets who have reconstituted in complex ways, right, through the use of what one could refer to as multi-genre material, right? Multi-genre material collage that constructs a narrative, right? And that collage includes flyers, fictive flyers, made years later, and advertisements on Amazon.com, and it traverses a variety of social media spaces and times in order to elaborately construct what one could call the hoax of the grand piano. Well, that's one possible interpretation of this complex and sophisticated variety of rhetorical deception. Or one could say that this complex collage of materials that includes flyers and announcements and readings from these volumes and these and volumes themselves collected later in varieties of ways and performed and textualized in varieties of ways and materials across multitudes of genres and domains of social discourse. One could say that rather than being entirely a hoax, right, that in fact it is better read as a discursive domain, and what David Antin does in this 10th segment of his discussion and his discourse, which he self-titles Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, and of course collective autobiography or the hoax of collective autobiography, could constitute either a narrative form of storytelling, right? If one imagines that there's enough individual and collective transformation of psychological subjects and subjectivities going on to relate it to David's distinction between narrative and story, or it could be a non-narrative storytelling if the if these compound genres and social media fictions and varieties of material and materially self-referential, right? Collections, merely tell a story of this group identity that doesn't challenge whatever the self-understanding of these 10 individuals, plus 10 individuals plus 11 of 10, I suppose we could say, if we include the supplemental collective autobiographers of this tale, and what David is concerned with, and the manner, the means, I should say, by which he explores whether this collective example of a particular and complex, right, elaborate, one could say, variety of rhetorical deception, if either the discursive domain that it opens, right, in the manner in which, okay, let's return to this idea of Kathy Acker meeting Herbert Marcuse on the road to Thebes. Clearly, in this discursive domain that it opens, right, the encounter of Kathy Acker and her muse of transgression with this figure who could be regarded as the sort of one of the last examples of someone who belongs to this school of critical theory and the Frankfurt School, right? And his construct of repressive desublimation. Well, clearly, there's something at stake beyond the significance of a series of events in space-time that constitute a story. I was walking to Thebes, and I met this man on the road, and we had a conversation, and these are all events that that may or may not constitute an interesting story. But when the stake, right, when the stake of this particular story and this particular encounter and the stake of hiding the understanding within this act of rhetorical deception becomes a matter of one's ability to continue to perform under the wing of one's selected muse, and the way that one encounters the obstacle of a particular discourse, of a particular argument, of a particular articulation of a moment, a historical moment that no longer allows one the possibility of working with that muse. It's like as if you were told that you could no longer tell stories. Say you were disabled, David says, and I will step out of the character of David at some point in this, because I fail to understand all of the physics involved in the way that he utilizes, as he proceeds, this metaphor of the physics of getting a grand piano, into a space that the grand piano, doesn't want to fit into, and the choice of either taking it up a stairway, or using a complex set of pulleys and hoists to raise it up to a window and bring it in through a window, and because I don't understand all of the physics, at some point I'll step out of character and I'll narrate my own understanding of this discursive domain that this narrative of the grand piano opens itself up to. But but in this instance, and at this point in the discussion, I can still follow what David is saying, and so what I'm saying now is in his voice, and so I will step out of the role, right, of reiterating what David actually says and performs in this talk piece. At some point, when we reach that point at which he starts to make the metaphorical or analogical comparison between the grand piano and this problem of the physics of moving this large, heavy, valuable object, right? Because a grand piano carries all this cultural clout, and makes it a part of the domain of high art, and it's very much, symbolically related to that domain, and that domain is in some way, inescapable from the object itself, and not easily, right, reabsorbed or conjoined, right, with our conventional understandings of the avant-garde, and the sort of radical, disavowal of traditional culture and the high elite, right? The avant-garde was always against, in a certain sense, always against the ideological formations of the museum, and in a certain sense, but playfully, like responded to the economic, culture of the salon, as well, and certainly in its political manifestations in Dada and other examples of its political manifestations. It has always maintained this position as transgressive, right, of institutional cultural values and dominant ideologies, as they exist within aesthetic institutions in the cultures in which they're embedded, and the ways in which those aesthetic institutions support, and maintain, the ideological and political values of those cultures, but also, in terms of direct engagement with the social world and its politics as well, right? As in examples from the Living Theater and other examples of radical avant-garde movements from Dada onwards. He talks about before, and again I can relate and describe his discourse up to the point where I'm lost by the physics that he describes in moving this grand piano. But I can certainly understand the way that he frames and formulates, right, this problem of the symbolic value of the grand piano and the performance of these either unionized or non-unionized workers, right, moving this piano into this aesthetic space that in some ways points to this discrepancy between the privileged audience that doesn't have to perform this labor, and but benefits, right, culturally benefits from the performance of the instrument, and then the problem of the event itself, the structural event of moving the piano. And one could say that that's in a certain sense ergo political, right? The social politics of labor involved in all of the paranarratological inventiveness that precedes, right? That precedes the art event itself, and this is what he's concerned with the moving of this grand piano, and then it plays back and forth metapoetically with the symbolic values of the grand piano, and he mentions also, he refers back to the Marx Brothers film Night at the Opera, in which first Chico plays this grand piano, and when Chico's playing the grand piano, it's not as obvious that it's a grand piano, because what we're focused on is on the keyboard and on Chico's playing, and he has that way of playing where he's very playful with his fingers, and his fingers do a kind of dance, and it's really more about the dance of the fingers, or perhaps the relationship between the dance and the funny movements that he makes with his fingers and the sound of the music than it is about the music per se. So the humor develops, David says, out of this relationship between the strange performance of the movements of the fingers that one doesn't expect, to be involved in the playing of the piano, and then the sounds that they make. And so there's a relationship, he says, between the dexterity, right, that Chico has to perform. The dexterity of the dance and the dexterity of the music have to come together. There's a conflict or a confluence that's necessary of kind of, if not exact and perfect movements, but the absence of obvious error, plays into the anticipations of the relationships between the notes and the performance of the playing. And it's a very lowbrow in a way, right? It's a very lowbrow performance in the fact that Chico represents this this working class Italian immigrant, and he's performed within this vaudeville, vaudeville or kind of post vaudeville theatrical performance that the Marx Brothers have developed and have managed to integrate right into cinematic form with these kind of very thinly developed narratives that almost these fable-like, right, this kind of fable-like simplistic narrative strategy that holds the whole thing together. But and then he mentions one of his rare passing mentions of Anthony Artaud, the surrealist dramaturge, theater theorist, performance artist, poet, and an overall aesthetic thinker, right? But he mentions but he says Artaud was really right, in a certain sense, the thin narrative that holds in any one of a number of these the films, cinematic representations that the Marx Brothers produced together, whether it's A Night at the Opera, as it is in this case, or A Day at the Races, or any of the others, really is a way, right, of containing and packaging. We can say of marketing what is essentially a kind of anarchist, as Artaud refers to it. This anarchy of cultural destruction that is always a part of the humor in each one of these theatricalizations, right, that the Marx Brothers produced. So that the idea of the Marx Brothers at the opera, right, takes on this sort of cultural value of high art, and it exposes it to the material universe in which these in a certain sense marginalized characters perform and deconstruct this world, right? And then he says when Harpo, right, when Harpo takes over in this scene with the grand piano in Night at the Opera, and that's when you first notice that it is in fact a grand piano, because we get a shot that's we get a cinematic shot, right, that we didn't get when Chico was performing, and we were focused on that dance and that movement and that play, between the dance and movement of his fingers and the music that he was producing on the piano. And when Harpo steps in, and we realize, suddenly that not this isn't a stand-up barroom style piano, but it's in fact a grand piano, and Harpo's attack, right? Harpo's musical attack is not one of coordinating the finesse of the movement of the dancing fingers and this kind of raunchy early jazz style performance that Chico produces, but it's literally, right, an assault upon the domain of high art, and he literally destroys the piano. And I was going to say that I was going to, David, this is David again. David says, I was going to bring in this idea and talk about, say one had a disability, and we're going to use space-time travel, to talk about this and this particular analogy. But in a certain way, you can imagine that Harpo is kind of a representation of an individual with a disability. He doesn't speak, right? He's clearly gifted, and he's a musical genius, and the character that he plays. Let's not worry about who Harpo really is, but the character that he plays, variously and performs in these films, right, is musically gifted and plays the harp and talented, but doesn't communicate verbally very well at all. And in fact, he has to use a variety of objects, right, and hand gestures and sounds that he produces, and often he carries in his pocket, these musical instruments that help him to articulate, his messages and his narratives and his stories, using all of these other devices, and so one could imagine that he's a comic depiction of someone that is neuro unique in a certain sense, and that certainly if we don't want to think about him as neurologically disabled, which David Antin says is not entirely appropriate to the way that we imagine this character, but he certainly is non-normative, right? Cognitively, he doesn't belong to what our general understanding is of existing within this sort of non-marginalized or normative domain, in which communication and the ability to communicate it is largely taken for granted, right? You can never take for granted that Harpo is simply going to tell you what's on his mind, right? He might have to use a bugle and a painting, or the frame of a painting, and hand gestures and maybe an elaborate dance-like performance in order to accomplish that. And there may be a kind of David says comedy of errors that results as an aspect of the gap, between what Harpo is able to communicate and what his addressees, imagine that he is actually describing and narrating. So David says so that's in the background. So imagine that you have some kind of disability, right? That say you're David Antin says, say you're Larry Eigner, right? And you have to play a grand piano. Well, there are going to be certain obstacles in the quality, to the performance, right? That arise, right, from the physical and from your physical embodiment and certain limitations that you have in relationship to the performance that's expected. And if this is a classical piano performance, then the distance, between the expectations of the perfection of the performance and the limitations of your ability to perform the piece, if you're Larry Eigner, is the distance between the set of expectations and your ability to meet those expectations is going to be perhaps too great to imagine that that this is the mode, this is the arche, under which, as an artist, you might be able to express yourself, right? Correct? And in a certain sense, all avant-gardists regarded this notion of high and classical art as belonging to what we might refer to as the muse of perfection. So David says, let's ignore whatever the individual muse that performs, right? That performs as a selective choice in the medium and materiality of one's chosen artistic expression. So he says, so for example, I'm a poet and I operate in this domain, this discursive domain, under the wing of melite, right? As a thinking poet, an occasional poet, a poet that of meditations and thought and occasional speech. And as a poet, I perform, verbally. And say that your medium is dance, and your muse, according to that medium, is terpsichore. He says, but socially, you operate under other imperatives as well that are articulations of social political domains and hierarchical values, cultural values that interact and reinforce the construct of such domains, and there are implications for your ability to belong to any one of these domains. And high art, sometimes what we imagine is a relationship to the classical, but it needn't be a relationship to the classical. Any mode of high art, right? has certain expectations, right, in the performance and ability of the performer, to exceed, what one could call like a standard and normative performative ability, in order to occupy this position within the expectations of what constitutes this framing of this humanistic idea of this high art domain, right? That one is required in a certain sense to be a genius, and the performance of one's unique abilities and exceptional, right? Exceptional characteristics of performance, the perfection of one's skills, for example, as a speaker and a performer of improvisatory verbal discourse, no matter, how clever or well thought out, in any of the ideas that I have, under this domain of melite is, as a classical performer in this domain of high art, I still have to avoid, making these long pauses or using my hands in ways that don't contribute to the discourse that I'm producing, right? And I can't lose my way. It's like if you're a figure skater, an aesthetic figure skater, and you slip on the ice. Well, you can be very athletic and have a terrific ability in skating, but if you make too many errors, you're going to be judged against the standard, right? That high art, right? And these domains of what we could, if we wanted to distinguish between the high art of modernism and the role of the avant-garde, right? In examining and in some ways demolishing, right, those kind of notions and expectations of what a masterpiece is. But high art always belongs to this idea of the masterpiece, and the masterpiece always carries with it a notion of a kind of perfection. And if we want to think about it that way, and in addition to having a muse, that's directed towards one's given medium, then there's another level, or one could say another circumference, or another interactive, right, domain that informs the way that one relates to this muse as medium. And in high art, that's necessarily this muse, teleiosis, perfection. And teleiosis. I said teleiosis. Was that? Teleiosis, not teleiosis. Teleiosis, right? And David says, so if I pronounced teleiosis, I wouldn't be here in front of you performing on this stage. If I pronounced teleiosis, and got it wrong, you would question. You would question my knowledge, and you would question perhaps my relationship to my muse melite to begin with. So when I say teleiosis, I have to get it. I have to get the pronunciation right. And if I have a disability, and it's difficult for me to remember, how to pronounce, words like this, like teleiosis. He actually gets it right when he says it. He says teleiosis. But let's just say that he says, teleiosis. If I pronounce, if I pronounce teleiosis, he says, I'm just pretending that he got it backwards. Then no one's going to believe that I really have a relationship to this muse melite. And he says, oddly, things like this, in and not just in the domain of high art and classical art, but have more influence on an audience's understanding of whether you really know what you're talking about and whether you really have a relationship to the muse melite than the depth and significance of your ideas. As long as you don't stutter and you produce a continuous flow in the articulation of your verbal discourse, and your tellings aren't interrupted, and you pronounce all of the words correctly, and you don't make any factual errors, very much. And then he refers to Fred Camper, the film critic from the Chicago Reader, and his obsessive compulsive relationship to spelling words correctly and getting the facts correct, even if you really don't know what those facts mean, right? And an example could be a reading of this is still David talking. An example could be a reading of, say, Hollis Frampton's film Zorn's Lemma, right? And why the English apostrophe in the pluralization isn't represented, and if you and he points for Camper, like the fact that there's no apostrophe in the way that Hollis Frampton spells, right? This the title of this film is this factual detail that demonstrates from Camper's perspective the muse of Taliesis, that you got it right, right? You got it right in this very high art manner in which you make no mistakes, and the perfection of the Taliesis is recognizing in someone else's error. Hey, that apostrophe in Zorn's Lemma doesn't belong there. What's interesting, if you ask why, why isn't there no apostrophe? Generally, someone like Fred Camper, might not be able to answer or respond to the question, or even if they could respond to the question and say, because Hollis Frampton is his title is referencing the way that this grammatical construct would be organized in German and not English, and there would be there would be in the German rendering of Zorn's Lemma no apostrophe, right? So that's an account of the literal, right? The literal level of an understanding of why the title of this film is constructed in the way that it is. But then if you follow up with another question, well, why does he want to refer to the original German and not write it in English? Or if you ask the question, what is Zorn's Lemma, and how does it relate to the various components of this film, then he might be equally flabbergasted and unable to concisely articulate an argument for the relationship between that title and that work, and so depth and comprehension and what one imagines truly belongs to Melite isn't really part of Taliesis and this idea of perfection that frames this other realm, right? This what could imagine as being the social-politically symbolic framing realm, right? That determines the social value of the discourse, rather than, right, like, rather than the depth of belonging, to the muse of whatever particular medium that one feels, one belongs to. So, David points out that, someone like, Larry Eigner, might know what the proposition of Zorn's lemma actually is, but may have a lot of difficulty articulating it within the confines of his physiological and neurological uniqueness, and that and that difficulty arises from a relationship to lysis, rather than melite, or to whatever particular aesthetic muse of poetry that Larry participates with, right? So the problem of that these social constructs, right, these social domains of organizing aesthetics, give rise to in relationship to lysis, and perhaps other muses, as well, become problems of belonging, to certain sets, and problems of for human beings or intelligent entities that by virtue of whatever difference, from some expectation, defines them against the norm of the expectation, right? That the difference itself, right, creates a problem of belonging to the set. And interestingly, David says, in a sort of metapoetic way, sliding into this metapoetic moment, the problem of belonging to a set, relates to the idea of Zorn's lemma itself as a conceptual and mathematical idea, right? So we could, in fact, utilize the idea of Zorn's lemma to explore this idea of inclusion, versus inclusion within certain, sets of intellectual domains and social domains, that belong to aesthetics, but belong to other realms as well, and support, certain ideological conditions under which social organization, in all of its, deployments of inequality and oppression and suppression, can exist and continue to reproduce itself, right, in all of these forms, and that would be an interesting way, right, to address the problem of how one goes about, playing a grand piano, given the expectations of the high art that it symbolically represents, if one is physically or cognitively, incapable of producing, right, teliosis in in relationship to the performance of this or any other medium, right? Correct. And and he says, okay, let's take an example. Let's utilize space-time. Let's utilize space-time travel as a means of examining some of the difficulties that arise from the notion of performance as perfection, as opposed to a performance in which error and mistake and the limitations, right, of non-telesis informed performance and performativity is allowed as an expression of this basic idea of process, as opposed to performance, both performance and the artifact that results from the performance, as an example of the perfection of telesis. So let me narrate, from a future film whose title, will be The Grand Piano. I have to perform David says, I have to perform a time leap here, because this film hasn't been made yet, but will be made in a few years. In 2013, he says, Eugenio Mira will make a film called the Grand Piano. It's a kind of a thriller, and this film, many of you in the audience, he says, will be familiar with the young actor, Elijah Wood, from his performance in the Lord of the Rings, and that performance, whether any laughs, it's like whether one enjoyed or found Lord of the Rings to be a significant work of art in any way, shape, or form is irrelevant to the discussion. But and he laughs again. But Elijah will build a considerable career upon this performance, because it was such a popular film, and the public responded to it so well. So Elijah Wood and John Cusack star in this film, and it's about this once promising pianist who develops a psychological condition, kind of pathology of social anxiety that we generally refer to as stage fright, right? And although this is not this doesn't exist in the psychiatric manual as as part of the classification system, by which mental illnesses can be sorted and scientifically defined. Nevertheless, in the cultural imagination, we understand what this idea is of stage fright. It's not part of the DSM. He repeats, but we understand that it's a debilitating condition. So whether it's recognized as a disability, or whether it just symbolically functions as a representation of disability, via our understanding of this idea in the cultural imagination, it serves that purpose in this particular film, right? And so then David goes on and he examines he really just recounts and paraphrases and narrates the plot of Grand Piano, this Eugenio Mira film from 2013. So his reconstruction of the plot, basically proceeds in this way. This character, his name is Tom Selznick. He's an up and coming concert pianist who develops stage fright, and he develops it for some reason playing this complex piano piece called Cinquette, right? Okay, so keep in mind, this number, 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. La Cinquette. So he develops this anxiety playing this piece, and then 5 years later, right? So and David underscores, the fact that so we have 5 again. 5 years later, so there's a kind of prolepsis here, and we jump into the future, and he's scheduled to perform. Just like these language poets, we're all on the bill to perform at the grand piano. This period from 1976 to 1979, right? And you get these little flyers, and they are all scheduled, or perhaps all these the production of all of these flyers, and was just part of the rhetorical deception, and none of this ever happened. He says, just like in the film, the film is a representation that this happened, but it's not real. It belongs to this fictional domain that's produced by Eugenio Mira, right? And we don't confuse that, because we know that this is a fiction and a representation, and that as a fiction and a representation, it's a kind of deception and belongs to the muse of the muses of deception, right? The pseudologia in a certain way, but also opens up to this idea of a discursive domain. And that is that we can say, well, what does this film really tell us? What does it mean? What does it tell us about the domain of high art and the representation that this classical piano, right? This grand piano has to maintaining the standards under the rigor and the demands of telesis, right? And David points out that in this case, the fiction itself, the entirety of the fiction, the plot elements and the way that the film is constructed, and what it points to in the psyche is in a sense the unconscious exploration of the anxieties, right? The fears and anxieties and whatever incapacitations might result from the an anticipated inability to measure up to these one could almost say fascistic demands of this muse whom belongs to this social space, and whose name we've appropriated from the Greek word for perfection, telaisis, and so in recounting the plot that I'll go back to and narrate over David's account. He's pointing to this allegorical relationship between the subject who encounters this experience of desiring, right? Desiring to become a part of this social world and this circle, in which a certain amount of not only economic security, right, is granted, but a certain amount of social adulation and respect and all of these all of these, emotional needs, like that, that artistic, subjects in particular, like, are fond of, right? Because, artists, tend to be narcissists, and artists, tend to require, a certain amount of, social gratification, whatever their medium, but performance artists in particular, and actors, and and we can include, among performance artists, musicians who perform on stage, at least, and who aren't limited in their musicality to merely composing or even merely recording in almost laboratory-like conditions in recording studios. But most musicians perform for a live audience, and in that sense they belong to this domain of artistes, who David claims, at least. I don't know if I would necessarily follow him in this, but that who tend to have narcissistic and exhibitionistic impulses. But for individuals who may be more introverted and less gregariously inclined, and perhaps in some ways less narcissistic, less buoyed, right, by social response, and requiring perhaps and then he makes a brief digression into an idea that he borrows from Jacques Lacan, and he says Jacques Lacan has this idea of transference and countertransference, and it's a relationship between the analyst and the analysand, but it's also a relationship, he says, between the teacher and the student. But it's a relationship in which there's a kind of adulation, and the adulation it has a pedagogical function, right? Because the teacher is respected, the student is more open to the information and knowledge that the teacher imparts to the adoring student, and because the teacher is in certain ways craving and craving the receipt of this attention and adulation and respect, then he or she, is largely he because we're talking about Lacan, but is more invested, right, in the charismatic performance and in the carriage of the responsibility and the burden of this this kind of one could say phallically motivated adulation, and he says so this necessarily creates a certain amount of anxiety on the part of any individual who lacks either the self-confidence or the physio-cognitive characteristics that can meet the demands of this particular muse, Telaisis, and so he says all of that in the background it helps us to understand that this fiction, right, it is really an allegory of all of the anxieties that emerge from that set of discrepancies. So then he returns back and talks about this character Tom Selznick and his performance of the Sanket, and I guess Tom's return is in large part the result of encouragement and prompting on the part of his actress and singer wife, whose name is Emma, and in the meantime, the composer of this particular piece, that is the result of is the not the result, but the opposite is the cause of Tom's initial stage fright. La Cinquette has lost his fortune and somehow, and this is the mysterious. It's referred, it's a mysterious disappearance of the vast fortune of this pianist and composer Godot, who supposedly wrote this piece, the Cinquette, and I suppose in David's take of the disappearance is that it represents the vicissitudes and accidents of our existence in space and time that that we can't guard against, no matter how much discipline and practice we put into the building of our skills, right? Like no matter how much Larry Eigner practices banging out the keys on that manual typewriter, that his ability is still going to be limited by the material actuality of his existence, and in some ways this belongs to each individual as a unique physiocognitive positionality, but it also it belongs to those to our relationship to larger forces, which may appear to be mysterious, if we don't understand the totality of the manner in which all of the overdetermined elements interact to express themselves in our in the flux and flow of our existence in time, and this is how he reads the disappearance of that fortune. But that in a certain way is not essential to the reading. What becomes essential to the reading is that when he returns. When he returns to the stage, he in the course of the concert in which he is playing La Cinquette, he finds a note. He finds a note written to him on the sheet music, and that note expresses a threat, and it's a threat that resides right under the anxiety of Talaias. You have to understand that in this fiction, this threat is pointing to this discursive domain of the muse of Talaias. In that sense, it's an example of metapoetic narratology, not even paranarratology, because it's not a sideline of the narrative, David says, but it's part of the metapoetics of the basic narratological strategy, right, of this film. And what makes it metapoetic is its relationship to Talaias, and the Talaias results as a natural outgrowth of our understanding that this is a concert pianist, and he necessarily produces work, right, under the aegis in part of Talaias, just like those figure skaters who aren't allowed to fall, or they won't get the high scores, right? In the Olympics, if you're an aesthetic figure skater and you fall, right, that contributes to the de-evaluation of your score, and you're never going to get a gold medal if you fall too many times, and if you hit too many wrong notes, you make too many errors, you're never going to be highly valued as a concert pianist, and this is all carried by the weight of this idea of the grand piano, right? So it becomes metapoetic in relationship to the necessity of maintaining the high standards of Talaias. All right. So So this note he receives, and he repeats, what it says, play one wrong note and you die. That's the muse, right? That's the anxiety that produced by the muse of Tillysis. And this character, he says, originally he thinks it's just a prank, so he ignores it. And you have to remember that, he already has stage fright, and this isn't helping. And he says, and if you think about, Viktor Frankl, and that passage for Viktor Frankl, where he says, well, say you have this anxiety. Well, the more that you become conscious of the anxiety, right, and the less that you're engaged in the flow, but the more that you think about that anxiety, the worse that it becomes, right? So if I say, absolutely do not make an error. I know that you have stage fright, and I say, well, absolutely do not make an error. Well, you're more likely to produce an error than if I said nothing at all. He laughs here. He's not laughing in this section. We must be slightly out of sync in our communication. Oh, Aaron seems to have finished reading the text of Zorn's lemma that was lurking in the background. So I can return in a certain way. Maybe I can return to the algorithmic pronunciation of Tillysis. Let's see if we can hear that. Yeah, there we go. So I had to turn down the volume because Aaron, for whatever reason, speaks louder than the algorithm that we have that teaches us the proper pronunciation. That is the Tiliosetic pronunciation of Tillysis, right? Who would be particularly infuriated, even more perhaps than Fred Camper, if we made an error in the pronunciation of her name. But I'm not sure that even that is correct, because as a muse, she may be recognized as Tiliosecia, but we don't have an algorithm that can perform the name Tiliosecia, so we're limited to this pronunciation. In any case, I probably won't repeat the pronunciation too many more times. We may return to Zorn's lemma depending upon how far we get in reconstituting this 10th, right, 5 plus 5 section of David Antin's varieties of deception in narrative and varieties of rhetorical. I don't want to make an error in Tillysis. Varieties of rhetorical deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling. If we get that far, we'll see. In any case, let's go back to David's recounting of the plot, of Grand Piano, this film that you will remember. We were required to time jump into the future a bit, but not too many years, in order for him to narrate. All right, so Tom is in the middle of this performance. He receives this note. He takes it. He thinks of it as a prank, and he ignores it. Only to discover further notes in the course of the performance that that not only threaten him but also threaten Emma. And then eventually, he notices this little laser tracker light directed on his chest, or perhaps on his hands. David says I can't entirely remember Into the Future that well, and probably the reason that David is having difficulty remembering is precisely because future memory is more difficult to maintain than past memory, and there are space-time travel. There are space-time travel theories that explain exactly why that is, and why the interface of phenomenological memory and narrative memory, are affected differently in future memory and memories past. But we're not going to engage that here. That's really an aside that belongs to a different discussion. So, so Tom, is disabused of the idea that this is a prank, and becomes concerned, right? And becoming concerned and disturbed, he gets up and he immediately leaves the stage, right, and shocks the audience and runs off to his dressing room, right. And then from there he receives further texts and instructions, to wear an earpiece. It's explained to him that the reason that he needs to play this piece correctly, apparently, like some mechanical device has been placed in the grand piano, and if he plays la sonquette, perfectly, note by note, and without any error whatsoever, then this is the key to unlocking some kind of mechanical operation that is related in some way to to a lock and a key that belong to a safe deposit box containing the disappeared fortune of Patrick Godreau, the composer of La Sonquette. Did I mention that David mentions that? I'm not sure if I remember if I had recounted the fact that David recounted the fact that Godreau, somehow mysteriously, lost this vast fortune of his, and I believe that we talked about that. We talked about the way that David interprets this as the accidents and vicissitudes of time, from which no amount of genius or practice or discipline can guard us, right? And I believe that we talked about all of that. But if we didn't, all of that is in David's recounting of this story. So anyway, if Tom gets through this piece, then this character, right, who's threatening and blackmailing him, will be able to let's see. This is I want to change this because this is Michael Mercel, and it's David who's recounting this. So that would be inaccurate, for us to let's see how I get back on track, to have the wrong sync here. So this character Clem, I think his name is. David recalls his name more clearly than I do, even though future memory is more difficult to maintain than past memory, and I'm only engaging past memory. In fact, I'm doubly engaging past memory in remembering David's performance and remember his recounting of this, which is future to him, but past to me, because I'm existing in the year 2022. And this film was made in 2013, and David is engaging future memory, in at least in recounting this, fairly exclusively. And even so, he manages to remember the plot and discuss it, much more clearly than I am capable of doing here, from my position of firmly ensconced, loci, from which I can recall and narrate past events. So there's a lot more, and he carefully recounts the events of the plot and all of the deaths that occur and all of the threats going on and the final results. The interesting moments, and I can skip a bit, is that there's a moment in which there's a kind of a fight, an encounter, not like not in any way like Achilles and Hector in the Iliad, this heroic, encounter, between these two heroes, but just like one of these, thriller struggles, right? And it occurs, in the balcony, and light fixtures the catwalk directly over the stage, and in this struggle, Clem, who's the bad guy, and trying to get to this fortune, via the perfect playing of this of this tune, the La Cinquette, dangles Tom over the edge of the catwalk, and Tom braces himself, and they both fall crashing down right into the piano. So it's like this moment again where the grand piano is destroyed, as it's destroyed, by Harpo Marx in A Night at the Opera. But here, with this plot, right, this thriller plot, right, that produces, a set of actions that relate, to the whole psychological structure of the anxiety, produced by the relationship that one has to have to this muse, to Lysis, to perfection, right? And the perfection of the perfection of the piano is destroyed, right, by the very actions that result, right, from this fantasy of success and the production of the perfection of this series of notes, right? The figure skater, the perfect performance of the figure skater, or whatever artistry that it may be, without any error whatsoever, and the anxieties and all of the plot twists and action that's produced out of the one could say the fecund groundwork, right, of the discrepancy between this desire for perfection and all of its rewards, and the actuality of the consequences, the vicissitudes of accident and all of these negative emotions that result and carry the plot forward from the discrepancy, right, is precisely what create the event that ensues in the destruction of this piano, and along with it, obviously the symbolic domain that this grand piano represents. So they come crashing down into the piano, and I believe that it's there it is, demonstrating the crashing down. This is the crashing, and then and up in the balcony. Let's go back a little bit and see if we can do that again. So this is where he's talking about the fight in the rafters, and hanging from the ropes and all that good stuff, and then Clem comes. I think I went back too far. But anyway, in any case, Clem at some point, and he'll raise his hands and is like, "This is the fight," and then Clem comes crashing down into the piano, and Tom, interestingly, lands elsewhere, and that has to be taken as symbolically significant as well, right? So perhaps in a certain way, coming to terms with those anxieties of the imperfection of performance and his role, in this realm that very much depends upon this particular muse, Lysis, in order for his social and aesthetic success to emerge as part of his autobiographical life narrative. And then in the final scene, the destroyed grand piano is the obliterated and destroyed grand piano is being loaded onto a shipping truck, and Tom climbs into that truck and begins playing the last four bars of La Cinquette, and he plays them perfectly and absolutely correctly, yet nothing happens, because he's expecting some mechanism to unlock and reveal the secrets of the key and the safe deposit box, or whatever it is, or wherever it is that this lost and mysterious fortune is located, right? And so he wants a happy ending in a certain sense. He wants to turn the tragedy into a comedy. He wants perhaps at the very end, he wants an aspect of comedy to step in. Maybe not Aristophanes, but he wants some aspect of Thalia, or the way that comedy was interpreted in the Renaissance, right? And he wants a happy ending. He wants the marriage and not the death. And he's already married, so he doesn't really need that. But he wants the symbolic marriage that is represented by the cash and the lost fortune, right? The return of the lost fortune, to someone, to whom it's deserving, right? And he should be rewarded for his perfect performance of these last 4 bars of Lost Enquête. But nothing happens, and so he's disappointed, and then he looks away. And then it looks like he's about to leave, and resign himself to the concluding tragedy, and give up the idea of the comedy, or at least a happy ending, right? Give up this idea of this narrative happy ending that results in the story. And it's like, well, you didn't get that this was a narrative, and that what this represented were these unconscious psychic forces that work in relationship to this muse, this muse who is a necessary requirement, Telaiasis, who is a necessary requirement of playing this grand piano in this setting in which you're recognized as a performer of high art. You didn't recognize that? You didn't get that? That this is the narrative right there, right? But no. But he wants a happy ending at the end of the story. And it looks like he's going to resolve himself to understanding this. But then he doesn't. He turns back, and he hears the gears of the internal lock. And then they turn, click, 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 click. And the sound of that metal key, let's see if I can find something to make that sound. Let's hear it. It's not really much of a metal sound, but let's see if we I got some keys here. There we go. All right, so he hears that, and then the metal key hits the floor, and then he bends down and he picks it up, and then we cut to black. Right, that's the end of the story right there. All right, and so so David says that the narrative in this story, you can't look for it. You can't look for it in the events of the plot, right? You can't look for it in the events of the plot and the relationship of, not even in the narratological relationship, right, between all the analepsies and the prolepsies and the story and all that's involved. But if you think of it as a domain of rhetorical deception, and you start to understand in relationship to this muse and the anxieties that this muse, Telaiasis, right, the anxieties of this muse, Telaiasis, that represents, and particularly if you see Tom as some kind of a figure in the way that he has stage fright of an individual that, who knows, maybe some kind of an individual with a disability, he says, maybe like a Larry Eigner. If you see Tom as a symbolic representation, and the stage fright, and stage fright doesn't, he returns to this idea, stage fright doesn't belong to that, domain of disability that you'll find in the manual of symptoms of mental disorders, the DSM. You won't find it there. It's not there. But symbolically, we understand what it is, and you understand that it can be disabling and how do you say this word? Disabling and incapacitating, he says, and he gets it right. My example is once again, withdrawing, perhaps, the muse, Telaiasis, withdrawing from the abilities of my mouth, to articulate, the error-free, this performance. Just like, I found it difficult to remember the pronunciation of all of those, Greek names and all of those Greek words that, in a certain way, I might be familiar with, but I never studied Greek in the university, right? I never studied Greek in the university, and unlike David Antin, I have a natural talent for it and a natural genius for it. So all of that, going on, and then he says, all right, so he says, so if that's the case, right, and then let's think of all of that, as a representation, right, of a discursive domain, right, that is is implied by the relationship to this particular fiction, and the way that it resolves certain sets of conflicts, that all of this that results from the relationship of this story and the narratology involving the telling of this story in this particular cinema. Like, what we find is that we can't locate it like as a narrative as opposed to a story unless we understand like the entirety of the telling, the story, the narratology, the entirety of that as a discursive domain. The fiction itself, right, is an investigation of the discursive domain that involves this encounter of this desiring and experiencing subject, right? That is the piano player, and specifically a piano player of a grand piano, right? Under the conditions of this particular muse, right? Telaisis, whose demands, are precisely that no error is performed, and this individual who's a symbolic representation of someone with a disability cannot produce a performance, right? Cannot produce a performance without error, and so it's the contradiction, right, of the embodied existence of this particular subject, and the desire to belong to this community, and experience the wealth of rewards, to which it belongs. That creates the narrative, and we can't look for the narrative on the surface. We have to look for it and understand it in the relationship of the symbolic values that this particular story, produces, right, in this Freudian expression, right? So, what looks like a story on the surface, right? We have to investigate under the terms in which we investigated what seemed to be the fiction of Kathy Acker's, rhetorical deception, that in fact, that she was this student of Herbert Marcuse. Well, she wasn't, right? She wasn't the student of Herbert Marcuse, but she did belong to the muse of transgression, right? Parabasia or Parabasisia, and the parabasis, right? The transgression, the muse of transgression, and the demands that the muse of transgression made upon her, right, forced her to encounter this figure of Herbert Marcuse as the symbolic representation of this idea, this concept. Of repressive desublimation. Because repressive desublimation essentially said transgression is no longer possible. And it took away Kathy's muse. In the same way that this muse, right? Well, maybe not in the same way, but in a similar way to the way that this muse, Telaisis, right, made demands on this performer that he could never meet, and that moment, that encounter, that contradiction, that conflict, is the situation of the narrative, and what informs the transformation of the psychological subject, or this encounter, right, with perhaps a future that can't be realized, and a desire that can't be put down, right, and it doesn't appear to be there in the story. The story seems silly. It's a very cartoon-like and simple story, but if we understand it in relationship to this muse Telaisis, then we get somewhere, and we understand it in relationship to the symbolic values of the grand piano and this idea of high art, then we get somewhere, right? So this is an allegory of, you could say this is an allegory of the opposite of the avant-garde. So what does it mean? Like, what is it? Let's return to this idea of the grand piano. What does it then mean, for a group of individuals, producing a community or collaborative autobiography, that's titled The Grand Piano? Well, it becomes very interesting, and we'll explore that further, and we'll explore we'll explore the way that David looks into the idea of deception and does more space-time travel, and in the future. But we're running out of time again, and we're very much exceeding our hour limit here. But I'll point to some of the things that David talks about, and some of the differences between that allegory of that film from 2013 that he time jumps into to discuss some of these issues of how narrative might be found in what looks like a silly story. This Spanish thriller directed by Eugenio Mira from 2013. I'll talk about some of what he moves to as we get into his return to the language poets and this real or imaginary series of texts, and this real or imaginary complex representation of a history of performance in 1976 through 1979. But he begins by looking at a description on Amazon.com of these volumes that are now available, and he turns to this page that on Amazon, right? Former CEO Jeff Bezos, Amazon, that struggled so grotesquely, right, to put down the unions that were being organized in order to protect labor that was being exploited, particularly in the period of the pandemic, in which Amazon.com a lot of companies benefited from COVID, but none so much as Jeff Bezos and Amazon.com, which continued to exploit its labor without adequate health insurance and provisions, right? Provisions of safety, for its labor force, which many individuals had no choice, but to put their lives at risk in order to deliver the products of this company under these unsafe conditions, and in part is why such a great effort has been made to unionize Amazon in that period. I lost David over here. Let's see if we can find him. We're out of sync with David, but this is kind of an aside, I guess, because I don't think David talks about all of this, but but anyway, he points to this Amazon page in which you can buy the grand piano, and this collection of this collective autobiography by this group of 10, right? We're talking about 10, and we're in the 10th part of this recording, and in part 1, which has an image of Tom Mandel. David points to the fact that the synopsis, right, that's provided by Amazon speaks of this ongoing experiment in collective autobiography, that 10 writers engaged in when this piece was made, and that it begins with. It begins with the idea of returning to and collectively experiencing as autobiography those events which may or may not have occurred at this coffee house, which is claimed to have had the name the Grand Piano, right? And on this particular site, this Amazon site, in which you can buy the Grand Piano Part 1, but whose image represents the Grand Piano Part 3, well, that's interesting too, and whether that's a rhetorical deception or not is also interesting. And then the author, is listed. The grand panel part 1 is listed as Ron Silliman first, and then Lynn Heginian second, and then it says and 3 more. But the image is of another one of the authors, Tom Mandel. So whether again that's an act of rhetorical deception or not, we can return to in future readings. But what David points to initially is the fact that here it says that this coffee house is located at 1607 Haight Street, and in fact, and he engages this as part of the historical, this as part of the rhetorical, not historical, but historical, but rhetorical. Done it twice now. I made 2. I've just made 2 of the exact same parapraxes, and my mouth, right? My mouth like wanted to say, like, not only the first time when I did it, wanted to say historical rather than rhetorical, but then even in the process of correcting the error, it wanted to say historical when I said rhetorical. So very interesting parapraxis there, which again, we need to remember. Parapraxis and parataxis are 2 different words, and dyspraxia is different too, and dystaxia is also a different word, and dysgraphia is a different word. So all of those words, that one may get confused regarding are different words, and that the relationship, right, to certain kinds of performance, can take on characteristics of discursive domains, right? Just as acts of rhetorical deception can have. So these could become performative deceptions related to the feigned or actual, right, performance of parapraxes, right? Anyway, and the engagement of those domains, may have depth and significance, or may be merely trivial. In other words, they may act and engage, right, as discursive domains in terms of arguments and formulations and conceptualizations of different aspects of the way that language is constructed socially, or they just may be playful and passing puns, and that distinction, David notes, is important in understanding discursive domains. In any case, he points out that this reference that exists on Amazon.com, Jeff Bezos' old playground, I guess, is to a location of a coffee house that is claimed to exist or have existed in the late 70s at 1607 Haight Street. But in fact, if you do a Google or DuckDuck search or whatever the other search engines are, you'll discover that there is no such coffee house, and what exists at 1607 Haight Street is apparently like a fast food taco bar called Street Taco. So David talks about the disparity there, and what the grand piano represents in relationship to its high art form compared to this name Street Taco that represents this location, 1607 Haight Street in San Francisco, in the Haight-Ashbury district. And then then he points out that elsewhere, on the production of grand piano, other examples of grand piano textual material, that it's more complicated, to do the legwork. But if one goes to the David is doing all of this in his future, right, and recalling all of this from future memory, which I've made a point is more difficult than recalling from ordinary memory. But he notes that if you go elsewhere and go to the grand piano site that discusses the grand piano and experiment in collective autobiography, and then you traverse the site, and under this designator, more information, you can get to a resource page, I believe, if I'm recalling his instructions correctly. Trying to remember where all of this is, and you can get to a resource page that includes information about the flyers. Well, I'll have to more carefully regard again this section that in which David Antin, and we can do that easily, because most of what I'm doing now is just a preview, or a trailer for section 11. But David discusses that somewhere in the future it becomes flyers, which are either actual representations from this period and this time that advertise for these events, and created schedules and dates, or that are representational artifacts, right, under these different genres that tell a story through these complex materialities, these complex fictive realities, these flyers as pointing to a fiction of that never happened, which was a series of events in this imaginary location, supposedly called the Grand Piano, in this real location that we know as Haight-Ashbury. And he says we know this, we know Haight-Ashbury is real because we've been there, and or some of us have. And I mean, for some of us, Haight-Ashbury itself might be fictive, but for many of us, Haight-Ashbury is real. So, but for not so many of us, the grand piano is real, and that fictive domain, if it is a fictive domain, David says, because he doesn't want to give everything away, right, belongs to the our investigations of the terms of these representations and how we measure them against our understanding of reality. Anyway, what I don't remember is exactly how he got to this place on this particular in this particular leap into the future. In which he identifies where these grand piano flyers are supposedly located, but he does, and he claims that on some of these flyers and on some of these schedules, a different location is provided for this reading, and some of the flyers, right, relate to the street's taco location, which is 1607 Haight Street, and but on some of the other, and I can't remember now whether it's part of the representation of the flyers or the schedules, but another location is provided, which is not 1607 Haight Street, suggesting that perhaps, that within the discrepancy between this number, 1607, and this other number. Oh, here it is. I can't find it in. I can't find the place in which it's discussed in David Antin's recounting of of his investigation in when he steps into the future and looks at some of these materials in order to evaluate their authenticity or whether they exist as discursive domains of constructed from examples of his broad-reaching construct of rhetorical deception, but I did manage as I'm filming refilming David's discussion with my left hand, I did manage to do some work on the that kind of splitting of the brain thing. I did manage to do some work looking elsewhere on the internet, and I found this representation in one of the flyers of the grand piano. So here we see that it's representing that the grand piano and this particular reading occurred actually at 1672 Haight Street. So although there are a lot of flyers, right, that represent the address as 1607, perhaps, David suggests, that those are mere, fictive fabrications that open up this domain of discursive engagement, comparing the activities of the grand piano to this location on Haight Street that exists, at least it exists today, in the year 2022, and David's again capable of making that time leap again, and exists. And just so that my readers don't believe that I made this up, street taco. So street taco and its comparison to you say is a social domain represented by this this noun phrase street taco, as opposed to the social domain represented by this noun phrase grand piano, right? And so he makes much of that. So let's go ahead and I'll return to David Antin with this hand, and so this is my left hand, watching David Antin again, and then with my right hand, I'm going to type into a search 1672 as opposed to 1607 Haight Street. 1672 Haight Street, and I'm using a DuckDuckGo search engine as opposed to Google, and I'll tell you why. For some reason, Google, whenever I search for something on Google recently, and I imagine this is a result of the extensive hacking that I have, it'll say, do you really want to search for language poets, or or do you really want to search for grand piano, and prove to us that you have the right? And then I have to prove to Google that I can identify bicycles in a series of of images, and that I know why, how an AI would be conducting a search. I don't know. I don't understand much of these kinds of things, but it wants me to prove, and even if I prove it, if I look for something else, it will ask me to prove it again. So I'm doing my best, not to use, Google, which has become a completely useless search engine in any case. But I find that I have almost as much difficulty with GoGoDuck or whatever it's called. All right, so I've typed in with my right hand as I'm filming. With my left hand, I've typed in 1672 Haight Street, and I'll go ahead and type in San Francisco as well, because just in case there's a Haight Street elsewhere. Which seems unlikely, but you never know. All right, so let's see what we got. So we've got 1672 Haight Street, San Francisco. Yeah, indeed. And let's see if it gives us any information about what it is. Stable reality construct into another fictionalized imaginary. Well, it's not giving us much information about what it is. Just a few years, the same group of language poets that were performing in this coffee shop called the Grand Piano are going to create Rasputin Records. A collective autobiographical account of the memory from the year 2010. Rasputin Records Incorporated, location. 1976. Da 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 da. And then he says, well, and the way that we know this is because we have to go back to one of our music. All right, so. So the options that we have as we persist into the future and attempt to determine the historical versus the rhetorical accuracy of this series of representations that create what is possibly a partial fictional universe in which a series of readings was performed in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco between 1976 and 1979. The only measures of accuracy that we have is that that in one of the locations that's provided, which is a discrepancy with the location of another one, we ended up at a location called Street Taco. Well, that certainly opens up a discursive conversation with the idea of the grand piano, and here we have Rasputin Records Incorporated. So this perhaps opens up another. And here's the location of Rasputin Records Incorporated. This perhaps opens up another level or possibility of an engagement as a discursive domain with this fictional construct of the grand piano, and we'll persist with what David makes of all of that in our next reading, and we'll see how well we do getting this one up on the web, as long as it is.